We are back talking vintage sports from Nedick's at the Garden. I'm Ralph Tyko with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. The Garden I speak of is no longer there. It was on 48th Street, and Nedick's was where people hung, the restaurant where they hung outside the Garden. And our memories are still intact. The panel co-hosts, if you will, are George Case III. George?
Good evening, everybody.
Okay. Al Blumkin.
Hello there, everybody.
The Zone Radio Network and IBM in no particular order. How are you, Al?
I'm okay.
Good. And, of course, from the Associated Press, Hal Bock. Hal?
Hi, everybody.
Welcome back. How are you? Hal?
Yeah.
Uh-oh. Did I lose everybody?
Oh.
No, I'm here. I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to start with Al. Al, when you were a kid, what high school were you going to go to?
I
know that's
Martin Van Buren High School.
Martin Van Buren. Was there anybody playing at Martin Van Buren that stood out when you were a kid? Anybody?
No, in my senior year we made the city semifinals and got blown out by Columbus, who went to the final and wound up losing to boys 21-15. Columbus slowed down the game. The boys had Connie Hawkins. So Columbus slowed down the game, and they lost 21-15. They did a pretty good number on us in the semifinals, but we didn't have anybody in that team that had amounted to anything at a higher level.
Anybody in your division that you remember you guys playing against that went anywhere besides Connie Hawkins? And we'll talk about him.
Roger Brown was on Wingate, who boys had beaten in the semifinal, the other semifinal.
Okay.
Boys had a pretty good team, and Roger Brown was basically all Wingate had, so they handled them pretty easily. Boys was...
Alan, I wanted to ask you, I'm curious, when you said, did you say the score was 21-15?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really slow down, so...
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way, in the old days, that's the way, the only way some teams could compete was basically they just sat on the ball for the entire game.
I remember one year I used to listen to the ACC tournament on WBT in Charlotte, and there was one year that North Carolina State was playing Duke, and the halftime score was 4-2. I think NC State won the game 12-10.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. That was before the shot clock, and they would
obviously,
and then right, and then later on, I know Dean Smith. He'd go to that four-corner offense with North Carolina, and that would slow the game down. And then, of course, when they put the shot clock in, I mean, it speeded it up. But a totally different game back. I remember when my dad was playing high school basketball back in the 30s, and they were playing in what they called a cage, and that's where they came up with the name Cagers. They would be playing in the high score in a game might have 6 points, and they'd win like 25-22 or something like that.
I mean, ball after every shot.
Yeah, they did. A jump ball after every made basket. A totally different game.
Yeah, I think my senior year in college, North Carolina beat Duke 21-20 in an ACC final. Right. And I remember when Bill Bradley was at Princeton, the first time they played Dartmouth in his senior year, they won by something like 70 points. And the second game was 30-16.
Right.
Yeah,
that's the strategy.
Our Peter Goldenbach sat on the bench for Dartmouth and watched Bill Bradley in that game.
Yeah.
He talks about that.
The shot clock changed basketball completely, and then it changed again with the three-point goal. So
right.
The game has gone through a lot of evolution. Unlike, for example, baseball. Baseball is still the same game, by and large, with the exception of the DH, as it was 50, 100 years ago. But
yeah, no question about that, Hal. You know, the college game, the high school game is and basketball is totally different from what it used to be. And I know even when I was playing high school basketball, I mean, you know, I think the highest score we ever had was something like 90 points, which was huge. But most of the high school games and even the college games, this was back in the, you know, 50s and 60s, the games were in the 60s or 70s. That was about, you know, that would be considered a high score.
Well, the clock saved the NBA. When they used to do the clock and the limitation on team fouls in the quarter. Because
there used to
before
be...
that, there was an endless parade from one foul line to the other. And there was an NBA game in 1950 where the Pistons, Fort Wayne Pistons, beat the Minneapolis Lakers 19-18.
Wow. Yeah. That's really amazing. I mean, that's how the strategy had changed and the game had changed. I mean, the players obviously are so much better, bigger, stronger, faster, but the strategy employed by coaches, you know, to get with the rules and the rule changes, a totally different game. And like Hal and Alan, you said, you know, the shot clock, the 3-point line, everything is different. And then even when in the 70s, I don't know whether you would remember this, but when I was at Rutgers had a 1976 Final Four team, and during those years, players were not allowed to dunk.
That's because
that was the Lou Alcindor rule, right? Lou Alcindor came to UCLA, and he was such an offensive weapon that the NCAA ruled out the dunk, took the dunk away for several years. Because
of being a paying fan and paying good money to sit through a 12-10 game.
Right.
Well,
God, no.
they knew what they were getting when they came in the door.
Yeah.
Well, there's another big change that went down in basketball, and that's when Wilt forced the lanes to be expanded. And even though you could dunk, they had to put the 3-second rule in. And, you know, an individual player who can force a rule change has to be looked up to.
So the 3-second rule was put in because of George Mikan.
Right.
Oh, okay.
He would be stationary there because he really couldn't move very well.
Well, yeah, and that's absolutely true, Alan. I remember, you know, when I was playing high school basketball, I mean, Mikan was playing with the Lakers at the time, and it was a great force. But you're absolutely right. I mean, they put that 3-second rule in because he would plant himself in the lane and he would just stay there.
Right. George, who were some of the players you played against in high school? What years were these in?
Well, I played in high school, and I graduated in 1958. But when I was in college, we played some of the great as Hal and I have talked, some of the great NYU teams. NYU was one of the top college teams in the country, and Philadelphia always had some great, college players. I remember one of my first games that I ever played in college. I had to play against a guard from Temple named Bill Pickles Kennedy, and he was sensational. And the Philadelphia
Bill Pickles
Kennedy
like was also a baseball player and made the Warriors, as a matter of fact, for a couple of years. That good basketball player.
Well, yeah, and back then there were some Gene Conley and Dave DeBusschere, and there were some two-sport athletes, both basketball and baseball. But they were some great teams, and coming out of Philadelphia and New York, those two cities had huge rivalries between high schools and college teams. That was great basketball.
Hey, George,
Philadelphia had Overbrook.
Right, that's where Wilt played.
George,
right?
Yeah, Hal.
The Palestra experience must have been something special.
Well, it was. I know it was for me. That was my first 2 points in college, and I was a sophomore. We were playing Temple. I think Rutgers was getting beat by like 30 points. The coach stuck me in with about 2 minutes to go, and I took a half-court jump shot, and the thing went in. That was my first 2 points in college basketball. So I'll never forget that,
right?
at the Palestra, right?
You'll never forget it, right?
Never forget it. The Palestra was the Mecca.
The Big Five in Philadelphia college basketball. Let's see if we can name them. LaSalle.
Yeah, well, you had the three Catholic schools, right? You had Villanova, St. Joe's, and LaSalle were the three Catholic schools.
Temple and Penn were the other two.
And then Temple and Penn were the other two. So, we're talking about high school basketball, the high school basketball, the Catholic Public League, the Public League and the Catholic League, they produced a tremendous amount of high school players that went on to play for Villanova and St. Joe's and LaSalle over the years.
George, were you ever in the old Villanova Fieldhouse?
Yes, I was, as a matter of fact. And
if you were in the first row, you stuck out your leg.
Yeah. Well, back then, Alan, the fact is that St. Joe's Fieldhouse and Villanova Fieldhouse were very similar. And the fans were right on. Yeah, the fans were right on top of the action. And
Pitt played,
matter of fact,
Pitt played in Villanova a couple of times. That's why I was there. Yeah.
Yep. And that's when Raleigh Massimino, who just recently passed away, but I knew Raleigh when he was the basketball coach at Villanova, and before that it was Al Severance. And Villanova had a great history of basketball, and now today with Jay Wright, they won a national championship, and Jay's from the area where I grew up here in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. He played high school basketball at Council Rock High School.
Oh wow. Hey, tell me something about Raleigh Massimino that we don't know. He just, as you say, just passed away, and you got to meet him when you were in the athletic shoe business. Am I correct?
Hello?
Did you get to meet him when you were in the athletic shoe business, George? Okay.
George.
Did we lose George? Okay, let me ask you this, Hal, when we'll get George back in a minute, I'm sure. Technical difficulties. Did you cover Philadelphia as well, Philadelphia basketball, as well as New York for the Associated Press?
No. I stayed in New York. I covered a lot of college games in the Garden, a lot of Knick games in the Garden. But the game in the Garden that I remember best, we talked about prep school basketball. There was a game in Madison Square Garden in the PSAL playoffs. Al Blumkin probably remembers this. Roger Brown of Wingate and Connie Hawkins at Boys, I guess. Boys High.
Right.
Went up against each other, and it was like a clash of the Titans. These were the two best players in the city.
Yeah, that was the semifinal when we lost to Columbus. That was the other semifinal.
What a team what a game that was. And the excitement, the building was jumping. And then, of course, there was Billy Burwell from Boys High a little later. Was also a great center, a great power center. So there were some terrific high school players and high school games in the Garden, and I remember those days fondly.
Yeah, I was cut off. I wasn't able to hear what you guys were talking about, but I was just going to ask you, the high school games, just like the college games, were played in the Garden?
Sure.
Yeah, until
not all, of course, but the city championships.
Right.
They kicked them out in the mid-'60s because of riots.
Right.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
I had already left. I left.
Oh, yeah, me too.
The Air Force in the '60s.
The riot, one of them, sometime in the late '60s, and they exiled them for quite a while.
Whoa. Well, I did get to see Kareem when he was Louis Alcindor at play in the city champions.
Lonnie Wilkins played.
I remember the Catholic school championships were at Fordham University in Rose Hill.
Yeah.
And I remember covering a game. I think it was Powell Memorial after Lou Alcindor had a player named Waverly Davis. And Waverly came out. He was a huge guy. He must have been 7 feet. And he came out and he was sucking on a lemon. And I'll never forget that scene. He was a powerful player.
Well, you know what? I have a little story about Alcindor, and they played when he was at Power Memorial. They played DeMatha Catholic from Baltimore, Washington area, and Morgan Wooten was the coach at DeMatha, and he would have his players practice holding broomsticks, his defensive players holding broomsticks over their heads. So the offensive players would get used to being able to shoot over Alcindor because he was so tall. And it just so happened that DeMatha beat Power in the national championship high school basketball game.
Whoa. You know, the geography of college basketball would have changed quite a bit. Lou Alcindor was supposed to go to St. John's. The St. John's Redmen had recruited him, and it looked like he was going there. And at the last minute, John Wooden swooped in, and he went to UCLA, and the dynasty was underway, you know. And
right.
But if he had gone to St. John's, it might have been a lot different.
Yeah, it's interesting you said that, Hal. I wasn't sure because, you know, he would have been playing. He'd have been playing right in St. John's backyard. And I didn't realize, you know, that had happened and how he went from, you know, New York City to L.A. That was quite a distance for a young kid who was, I'm certain, recruited by everybody. But the fact is that he had St. John's right in his backyard.
Two of the early NBA stars that went to New York City public schools, Bob Cousy went to Andrew Jackson, and Dolph Schayes went to DeWitt Clinton. And Clinton usually produced pretty good teams.
Well, we had at NYU, we had Satch Sanders who went to Seward Park, and Cal Ramsey who went to Commerce.
Yeah, Lenny Wilkins left the boys. And
yes, he did.
The baseball player Tommy Davis played on the same team and basketball team with him.
Yes, indeed, he did. And at just about that time, Tommy Stiff was playing at St. Francis in Brooklyn, and he goes down as one of the real tragedies. He was a terrific college basketball player, one of the ill-fated New York Knicks draft choices. Comes down with tuberculosis. His lungs never really fully recovered, and his brother Sam was almost as good as he was in the pros because of it, and Sam wasn't all that good. But New York or Brooklyn basketball had Doug Moe back in those days.
Tony Jackson.
Pardon me?
Tony Jackson, who went to St. John's.
Yes, and Sonny Dove and those guys.
Right.
Can you imagine Sonny Dove, Tony Jackson, and Kareem in the same with me? I don't know if it was Alan Seiden might have been there, or anyway, that would have been.
Sal Fury was there at St. John's.
Yeah, that would have been a hell of a dynasty.
Yeah.
Right there. George, Philadelphia basketball compared to New York basketball. Any big difference in the style of the game?
I'm not so sure there was a difference in the style, but I know that Philadelphia for years had a reputation, and the scouts and the players and all, they would talk about a prototype Philadelphia guard. And so I think, you know, and obviously New York had some great guards too, but Philadelphia had a tremendous, reputation as producing guards. They had Guy Rogers, and they had Hal Lear, and they had Mark Jackson, and these were some great college players who went on to the pros, and the prototype player out of Philadelphia was a Philadelphia guard. And the great players, the big guys like Wilt, I mean, he didn't play in Philadelphia. He went to high school in Philadelphia, but then he went to college. I believe Wilt went to Kansas. So, the college players in Philadelphia coming out of the Philadelphia Public League and the Philadelphia Catholic League, they're very much guard-oriented offenses, and that's where the reputation for the Philadelphia guard came from.
Didn't Walt Hazard and the Wally Jones come out of Overbrook also? Yeah,
I think they did, Alan. Overbrook had tremendous, athletic talent and basketball-wise, and in the Philadelphia Public League, Overbrook was one of the top players. I mean, the top colleges, also the high schools were West Philly, the what they call the Speed Boys, and they had some great teams. As a matter of fact, they won the national championship, I think, in 1977. They were 30-0. So, Philadelphia has a great high school and college basketball tradition, just like New York. So I think there's very little to choose from.
Didn't he come out of Philadelphia?
Who was that?
Who's that?
Earl Monroe.
Earl Monroe?
No, I don't think so.
I'm not sure, Alan. I really don't know. I have to look that up, but yeah.
I will say that Wayne Hightower was another one of those who went to Overbrook.
Yeah.
Right.
And a name that we both know, George, his name was Craig Pearson, and he was one of the Red Pearson's son from Pearson Sporting Goods, who you called on in your career, George. Yes. And Craig was the point guard at Overbrook when Wayne was there. I think he played behind Hazard as well, and went on to Albright. He was in pre-med, and he went to a studious school, and scored a lot of points at Albright. Never played in the pros, but went on to be the team spring training doctor for both the Philadelphia A's, or they were the Oakland A's at that time, Kansas City A's, and the Chicago Cubs in Mesa. So there was an All-American, almost an All-American basketball player that we could mention.
Well, that's really interesting, Ralph. You know, I knew the Pearsons, as you said. I mean, I called on Pearson Sporting Goods and Red's Pearson and his sons and Jack Pearson and you know, I knew them, and they were very well thought of in the Philadelphia area, supplier to the colleges and the pros and all that, and I really appreciated the fact that I was able to work with those guys, and I didn't realize at the time until you and I talked a few weeks ago about your relationship with the Pearson family.
Oh yeah, the kids were all my campmates. They were kids. They were older than me a little bit, and Craig and Billy. Billy's an attorney. Craig and Stanley. Stanley and I went to Kittatinny Camp when we were 7 years old together. He met his lifelong partner, Gail Goldis, at Kittatinny Camp, and terrific memories. And what a great store that was in Philadelphia, a great athletic supply store.
Yeah, well, they were, and also when you're mentioning, the basketball camps, I mean, I was fortunate because I was in the athletic footwear business, and I would call on all the camps in the Poconos during the summer. And a lot of those camps, Harry Litwack and Bill Foster. Harry was at Temple, and Bill Foster later, but he was at Duke. He was at Rutgers. He went to Utah. They had a camp in the Poconos. It was all-star basketball camp. And I would take Lou Hudson, Atlanta Hawks there, and I met a lot of the former players. And as a matter, one of the other players that we haven't even mentioned out of Philadelphia is Kobe Bryant. And Kobe played at Lower Merion High School. His dad, Joe Bryant, played with the Sixers, and I met Kobe when he was just a youngster, playing basketball in junior high school. So that's as far back as I went into that era. But, Kobe was a sensational high school player. And then, as he went on to college and the pros and, his reputation today.
He never went to college.
Yeah, well, he went right out of high school. That's what I'm saying, Alan. You're right. He went right from high school to the pros, bypassed college altogether.
Another one out of Brooklyn that I would be remiss in not addressing on this program is the Kangaroo Kid. Billy Cunningham came out of Erasmus.
Yes,
he did indeed.
Right.
And he started out at a Catholic school and came to Erasmus and either got hurt or was ineligible the year that another one of my camp directors, Bernie Kersner, led that team to the championship when they had Billy C., but he wasn't playing. So they won the championship in New York without Billy Cunningham one year. But yes, you're right, the Kangaroo Kid, who they used to have an expression, some guys played black, and some white guys played black. Billy Cunningham was one of those guys.
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing about Billy Cunningham, too, Ralph. and how, I mean, you guys always have a little bit of a New York accent. Billy Cunningham, all those years he played in Philadelphia and coached in Philadelphia, whenever you talk to him, he always had that New York accent.
Right. It doesn't go away.
A lot of those kids wound up working summers at Kutcher's, the country club up in the Catskills, as bellhops. Wilt Chamberlain was a bellhop up there. And
I saw a picture of that. Did you see that, Hal? There was a picture of Wilt in his bellhop uniform standing with all these guys. He's about, 7 foot, whatever the other guys are all, 5'7", 6 foot or whatever. But it was a hilarious picture to see Wilt. I guess they had to make him a special bellhop uniform for his size.
And then for many years they had a benefit game in the summer with a lot of the All-Stars up at Kutcher's to benefit
Maurice Stokes.
Right, Maurice Stokes,
right.
Which is a terrific charity hosted by the Kutcher's Country Club, and it was a highlight of the summer for basketball junkies who didn't have any games to see. That was a very special one.
Right. And there were also some tournaments up in Harlem. Was it the Rutgers?
Rutgers,
the Rutgers, sure.
Rutgers, right. So the Philadelphia equivalent of Rutgers was the Sunny Hill League, and the Sunny Hill League was where they had all the high school kids that were being scouted for colleges, and then there was the Baker League, which they had, which was the pros. So they were the two different divisions of college and high school basketball in the Philadelphia area at the same time that the Rutgers tournament was going on in New York.
Oh wow! That and sometimes
it was also very.
I remember Will playing at Rutgers quite a bit. So there was terrific basketball, and there still is, I think, down on in Lower Manhattan and West 4th Street, the playground on West 4th Street and 6th Avenue.
I've seen that a few times. Yeah,
and they had some really intense games in that setting. A lot of college players and a lot of top high school players would play there, and they'd play there all day and all night. I mean, it was just there were constant games in that playground.
Yeah, I have to mention another old campmate of mine, different camp I had to go to one year. It was Mayapack, and he played for Lincoln. He was Dave Newmark, and he was mentioned in Kareem's book.
By Columbia with Jim McMillan.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. And he played, Newmark played Kareem really well. He mentioned him as being one of the toughest competitors he played against. So, and Newmark went on to play 5 or 6 years in the pros. He went and played in Israel and what have you, and he's living out here in California as well.
We used to call him Nice News as as a counterpoint to Bad News, Jim Bad News Barnes.
Right. We had an author on, I can't think of his name, who wrote a book about Bad News Barnes. And
no, that was Jim Barnes, not Marvin. Marvin was later. Jim Barnes was
Tire Iron Barnes.
Yeah, Jim Barnes was taken from what was called Texas Western a couple of years before they won the championship. And the Knicks had first pick in the overall draft that year, and they took him. Reed was the second round pick that year.
Right, that was later. Yes.
Wasn't that Alan? Wasn't that team at? It became UTEP, but that was the first all-black college team, I think, right?
Jim Barnes was out of there for 2 seasons before they won the NCAA, beating Kentucky.
Right.
And the whole team there practically, when they beat Kentucky, were from New York.
Yeah.
Just like
and I think there was a problem, if I remember, that whether it was Adolph Rupp or whatever, that they didn't particularly like playing against UTEP because there was Kentucky. They were basically all white kids playing against the all black team.
Big segregationist.
Yeah.
Pat Riley was.
And the Loyola team in 1963 that beat Cincinnati for the championship had two New Yorkers, Jerry Harkness and backcourt man named Ron Miller, who went to Clinton High School here. No, he went to Columbus. I'm sorry. He went to Columbus. He was on the team that beat Van Buren.
Yeah, they came in the holiday festivals, and they played Dayton with Bill Chmielewski and Grady Hatton and Tom Hatton, I remember. That's one thing New York had was these tournaments, NCAAs.
Holiday festival,
holiday festivals.
That was something, yeah.
Right. Yeah. We lived, it was a good life growing up in and around the Garden, eating hot dogs at Nedick's against all the warnings of our parents. Don't eat that crap. Come home after the game. So, anyway, gentlemen, this was fun. Next week, we're going to talk to player agent Joe Casale. We're going to get an idea of what it's like to be in sports from that end of it. And George Case has dealt with many player agents over the years, so you're going to have some great conversations with Joe Casale. And Hal Bock, always terrific. Al Blumkin, Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Thank you, guys. I hope we all stay healthy till next week. That's what happens when you're 70. That's when you're 70 plus. That's what we think about.
I'm worried about Wayne. It seems like he moved down to Florida just in time for this monstrous storm.
I don't know. He's in Orlando. Joe Casale is in southern Florida. A number of my friends, the Stewarts, Marty Rose is up towards Jacksonville. Bernie Rose is in Southern California, in Southern Florida. So a lot of folks from the station. Let's wish everybody in the country good luck. We got Texas going bad. We got North Korea as in our face. These are hectic times, both from a climate change situation to a crazy man in charge with other crazy men in the world to deal with. So let's all take a deep breath and hope it doesn't blow up before the show stops.
Well, maybe that crazy Dennis Rodman can go over and talk some sense into his head.
Calm him down. That's right.
Well, he's the least crazy of the three that we're talking about. If we're talking about Trump and the guy from North Korea, he's not all that crazy. I remember the Little Richard, speaking of cross-dressers, was on Johnny Carson once, and Johnny Carson asked him some question about, well, don't you seem, how does it feel to be a little strange or this, that, and the other thing? He says, well, it doesn't feel all that strange when I go over to the bank. So he cashed in on that image. Are they talking about sending Rodman back there to negotiate? Or
I don't know, but you know what? I mean, he claims that he and whatever his name is are old buddies, so maybe he can talk some sense into his head.
Right. He has been over there before.
Right.
Several times.
Rodman.
Yep.
So it would be something that would be nice. And there's a guy talk about what a stellar Chicago Bull he was. Incredible rebounder, Dennis Rodman.
He was, and you know what? You know, I know a little piece of trivia. You guys probably don't know it, and I didn't know it until about 6 months ago. Dennis Rodman was born in Trenton, New Jersey.
Really?
Wow.
He was born in the same hospital that I was born in. My dad was born in. His parents apparently were stationed at Fort Dix in New Jersey, which is about 30 miles from Trenton. And when his mother went into labor, she delivered Dennis Rodman at Mercer Hospital in Trenton, New Jersey.
Wow.
Did he have earrings on when he was born?
I don't know about that, Hal, but I'm sure his hair was all the same color too. So.
Yeah.
Presumably.
Yeah, right.
All right, guys. Thank you very much. And to those of you out there listening, it's a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. And Hal Bock, Al Blumkin, and George Case III. I'm appreciative of your company. See you next week, guys.
Right. Good night, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
Adios.